I know.
Did somebody go to the potty?
I don't know.
Huh?
I don't know.
Did you poop?
Hey guys. So I'm not going to get started right away. I'll wait a couple more minutes until some people come in. But wanted to jump in, just kind of see, just to briefly here, how are you guys doing? How are we doing being with your family for multiple hours and days on end? Being with siblings and parents? How are we doing with dealing with remote learning? Do you feel, based on some of your comments on that form, so thank you again. I think I had like 77 people out of 96 students. That's really awesome. Thank you for that. That gives me a lot of good information in terms of how I'm going to structure things moving forward, and also gives us as teachers another data point that we can share with each other and say, hey, here's what our kids are saying. Here's how we can best support them as we go through this process together and go from there. Yeah, it's my COVID-19 protection beard is what we have going on here. So thank you again for submitting that Google form. I really do appreciate that. Talk to me a little bit more. Have things been smoother this second week 2? Do we feel like we're getting into a little bit more of a rhythm? Are you still finding that motivation has been an issue for you? Or do you feel like, all right, yeah, I got this thing down? Do you feel like your teachers have adjusted? Do you feel like your teachers have been able to kind of adjust to this new format and kind of temper expectations at times? What are your thoughts? Go ahead and fire some things into the chat there. Still stressful? What do you mean? Give me a little detail there.
Riley, stop.
Lots of subjects to cover in one day. Overwhelming. Well, that's fair enough. I get probably the waking up piece is probably an issue for some of you. Have you tried to create a schedule for yourself? More work, okay. Would you say, give me like ballpark, 30 minutes of work per class each day? Is that around an appropriate estimate?
When Chelsea's done with this.
Makes sense. People, I would say that there's a lot of success in that. I know for me, it's been a struggle at times. So trying to hold myself to some sort of a schedule. Some are about an hour. Okay. Half hour. Gotcha. Allison, do you think that there are issues with, is it more like the content that's being learned or the skills that are trying to be taught? Okay. How about this class? How do we feel in terms of the amount of work? Do we think it's an appropriate amount over the course of a week? Do you want to see changes? Obviously, less work would probably, people would feel better about it, but what do you think? Gotcha. So Riley, what we've been directed as teachers is, even if we're assigning things on certain days and the expectation is that you would have it done for that day or some sort of a review, we've been asked not to grade anything prior to Friday. The idea is that everything is due for every class on Friday. And And so that's kind of what you're supposed to be hearing from teachers. If you're unsure about that, contact the teacher directly and say, hey, I just want to make sure, is this actually due at this particular time? Like, for example, the Otto von Bismarck things that I had you look at, the primary source documents for him, the map yesterday, I assigned the discussion. And while I mentioned it's not due until Friday, I think it'd be helpful for you to have it done for us to then discuss it. But ultimately, I'm not going to hold you accountable for that individual grade until Friday, if that makes sense.
No, Bobby's at school.
Fair. And what I would say in terms of what my goal in all of this is, let's focus on the skills that we've been concentrating on for the beginning half of the year from a writing perspective anyway. So thesis statement, contextualization, complex understanding, and using details to explain and prove and support a thesis statement versus just describing in detail. If we can concentrate on continuing to do those 4 things, I'm not so worried about trying to introduce new skills into this. Yes, we're still going to work on document analysis. Yes, we're still going to try and see how primary source documents can influence what we read in the textbook. But ultimately, for me, I'm approaching this last quarter of the year as under the assumption that, hey, we may not get back into the classroom. Again, I have no information to guide us there, but I'm going to approach it with that perspective and focus on the skills that we've already done and just learning them through the new content as we go through. I would say a new estimate might be to bring us right up to World War II. Maybe we don't get into World War II this year, depending upon the way things go. But that's kind of my thought process right now. Did you want to say hello? You say hi? Riley, you're on video. Will you say hi? Oh, now you're shy. You went from animal calls to silence. Stinky. So at this point, let's start to get into let's start to get into the documents. I would expect this review maybe to be like 30 minutes or so tops. Hi, there you go. Thank you. This is the menace. In terms of the documents, the ones, yeah, I know. In terms of the documents, I want to thank those of you who already submitted those. It looked like, no thank you. Yeah, no thank you, Wawa. Looked like about 2/3 of you from each class, and that's only going to help us as we go through here. So I do want to talk about the 3 documents. So let's start with the map. Yeah, no thank you. Time to go away. Say bye-bye. Bye-bye. There you go. I want to start with the map. Let's talk about some of the things that we saw there that came from the lecture that you watched in addition to it. So talk to me, map people. What did you notice about the map and how did it fit in with what we already learned, what you read in the textbook last week, as well as what the lecture went through? Quick note about the lectures. Most of those lectures I've already created either for this class or for my European history class. I'm probably not going to have to recreate a lot of them. So any of the writings that are displayed within the lectures, unless I specify that they need to be done in the directions for that particular day, you don't have to do those. So the type 1 writing, it would be too much of a mess from an organizational standpoint. Would I recommend that you do them or at least consider those things prior to jumping into the lesson? Yeah, it gives your brain a frame of reference for what we're going to be covering. But you're not required to do those and submit those in any way, shape, or form. Any of the writings that you would see in any of these lecture videos, they would be things that we'd be doing in class together or things that I'd be assigning as outside work. So unless you see it in the specific directions, you do not have to complete the writings for any of those lecture videos. And again, some of those lecture videos may have been created for other purposes, but I thought rather than reinventing the wheel, that they would suffice for our purposes. We're going to have a formal quiz or test online throughout the classroom. I have currently planned 2 quizzes. They'll be a little bit multiple choice with the analysis style questions, but in my mind, I'm going to assign some of those analysis style questions, instead of it being like a quiz, have it be like an assignment instead of something that's like, okay, at this particular time you want to do this. Could you still cheat? Yeah, for sure. But the idea is that by using those analysis style multiple choice questions and short answer questions, hopefully I'm getting your actual thoughts and your actual knowledge as opposed to just I'm going to Google the answer. So short answer, yes. We're going to have probably 2 is the way that I have it planned out or blocked off right now. They'll be small in nature. Maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes would be my estimate. And in terms of how that would work, I'd work out a time and say, okay, at the beginning of this week, let's say Thursday will be our quiz. It's going to be sent to all of you at this particular time. If you can't do it at that time, I need you to contact me and we'll make other arrangements. And then I need it to be submitted by 45 minutes later or something like that. I'll account for like tech issues by adding in another 10 to 15 minutes in terms of how long I think it would take. And hopefully we would do it that way. But again, those quizzes, I'm thinking only 2, not a formal test. At the end of World War I, there is going to be a DBQ related essay. But again, we'll have time to work our way through that. My idea is that we would have some form of communication between one another prior to you actually submitting it for a grade. So that's what I'm looking at big assessment wise. Otherwise, most of it is going to be analysis style items. I know a lot of people said we want more worksheets, so I can do a couple of those. I'm not going to have like a 10 question worksheet where 5 of you can just do the same thing and then submit it. And here's our answers and give you like 20 points for it. Like it's just not the way that I look at assessments in education. So I'd much rather weight the assessments that you are explaining ideas versus just finding answers to things. So I can give you some additional kind of reading comprehension worksheets to work your way through. But what I would tell you is it's not going to be a ton of points. Okay. All right. So let's jump back into Otto von Bismarck. And let's talk map first. So give me a little bit about the map people. If you're in here, got about 40 people. So we should have at least 5 to 10 people who did the map. What were some of the things you noticed? What were some of the connections that you made to what we already read about in the textbook last week on Otto von Bismarck and German unification, and also what you saw in the lecture video from Tuesday? What do you think? Yeah, and I'll show you more about this later on, because actually there is a great piece of artwork that depicts, it's a French map, and it shows Alsace and Lorraine, and they're just black spots on the map. They're just colored in. So it's almost like the French refuse to even acknowledge that Germany now has possession of Alsace and Lorraine. We'll get into that more as we continue to kind of make our way in there. But yeah, the regions of Alsace and Lorraine that are ceded to Germany as a result of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871 will play a big role moving forward into World War I and into World War II. Let's talk a little bit more generally now about all 3 of the documents. You should be able to kind of respond to this. What are your thoughts on Otto von Bismarck? And I was really impressed as I was reading responses from some of the different documents. People had some really insightful things to say about Otto von Bismarck's character based on what they read. So start to throw some things into the chat here about how you would describe, maybe just some adjectives that you would use to describe Otto von Bismarck, and what your thoughts were, why you thought that way. Machiavellian. Yeah, I tried to kind of force a little compare and contrast with that. Someone did make sense. They said, whereas Machiavelli was, hey, I'm just going to have one person do what's right in order to do what's best for its people. Otto von Bismarck is like, we are going to do what's best for the people, but ultimately we can't trust everyone to make those decisions for us. So we have these select group of politicians. If you read the Blood and Iron speech, I would recommend all of you look at all of these sources at some point here this week. Result-oriented, realistic. Yeah, and the word that we want to use here is realpolitik. The idea that, and I kind of went into this in the lecture, the idea that, yeah, he's a conservative at heart, but ultimately the end justifies the means. Yeah, ultimately he wants results, and his goal in all of this is kind of twofold. A united Germany, and a united Germany with Prussia being the main focus of it. And, he's coming from Prussia. This is getting into the weeds a little bit. There's a Hohenzollerns is the name of the German family that had control over that area. They're like the Habsburgs of Prussia. Radical leader, kind that wants results, sure. Very authoritarian himself. Yeah, he wants to unify the people, but he wants to unify them in a very specific way. I like the idea that there's authoritative actions. I'm glad that you are realizing that you misinterpreted now. That's cool. Why Prussia? That's where he's from. Also, Prussia is really the most organized, I would say, of the German states during this time. Brandenburg Prussia has grown into like the heartbeat of these Germanic states. How about in the Blood and Iron speech? What were some of the things he said that showed how authoritarian he was? I'll give you a hint. What does he say about liberalism in there, and what does he say about media in there? And again, as a reminder, we're forgetting exactly the words that conservatism, liberalism, socialism, communism, we're forgetting what those words mean in the modern sense. We want to be looking at what they meant to these people back then as our frame of reference. How so, Tom? Why were they unifying underneath Prussia? So Tyler, in 1820s, 1822, I want to say is really when it began, maybe 1830. We have an economic union between these different German states, and it's called the Zollverein. And the Zollverein is like the first time that these Germanic states, since the Holy Roman Empire fell apart, are getting together. And what it does is it gets rid of all the economic restrictions between them. Previously, if you wanted to send something from one spot in these Germanic states to another, then you had to pay taxes as you went through each of those 38 different principalities. What the Zollverein did is tried to unify them from an economic perspective. And so now that these nations are starting to talk together, there's a sense of, oh, hey, we're all Germanic peoples. Maybe we should be unified in more than just economics. And so in 1848 and 49, there's a conference in Berlin where they tried to decide how they would unify. And there's a discussion there about Kleindeutschland and Großdeutschland. If you take Germany, Little Germany or Big Germany, basically, is Austria a part of this or not? Ultimately, they decide, no, we're going to go with Kleindeutschland. And Austria then goes and does its own thing in addition to all of the Austrian Empire stuff. Constitution not being effective for the Prussian people in the speech. Yeah, I want to talk about that for a second. What is the reasoning that he says that the Constitution would not be effective for Germany? Did anyone pick up on that?
You want to get on the bench here?
And this relates to Thomas's point right above it in the chat.
Let me see what's the top. Oh, you're stuck.
Here's the line I'm looking at.
Oh, you want it.
We are too well educated. How's that for trying to really pump your people up, and the ideas of nationalism that wouldn't necessarily go along with conservatism, but Yeah, the independence of the individual. Very good. Yeah, we're too well educated to support one. We're too critical. The ability to assess government measures and records is too common. We are smarter than those French liberals are. And so as a result, we don't need a constitution because we're going to be critical of government and expect government to adjust from there. I think that's a really interesting argument to make. Again, as he tries to use nationalism to unite the German peoples of these different city-states together and give them, I guess I shouldn't say city-states, these principalities together for the first time. That's not something that Germany has seen yet. And so he pushes them with the idea of what it means to be German as a way to unite them. Then he says, oh, and by the way, there are all these people out there against us. If we look at the quotes, let me pull out the quote here. How about this line? Conservatism wants to keep the status quo. Conservatism wants to say, hey, we want things to exist as they are. We want people to stay in power. We don't want another French Revolution. But then he says this, all treaties between great states cease to be binding when they come in conflict with the struggle for existence. So his justification for going in these different wars, the Danish War, the Austro-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War is, well, they're infringing upon our right to exist as we think is appropriate. And so as a result, we are justified in going to war against these other nations. That's a real split from European conservative thought in the first part of the 1800s. And so this idea of unifying Germany, yeah, he's a conservative in terms of dealing with people within his own nation, but he is not a full European conservatist like Clemens von Metternich is in 1815 into the 1820s. What else can we say about OVB? And again, he is an incredibly important individual for structuring what Europe is going to look like and act like leading us into World War I. I really like this quote as well. It's giving us an indication. Again, this is kind of the definition of realpolitik right here. The idea that people never lie so much as after a hunt, during a war, or before an election. Uses war to get what he wants. Yeah, again, realpolitik. Like a true conservative would not look at war in the same way. Right mindset to lead the people. How do you think, let's take a look at leaders historically speaking. People react very positively when someone says, we're going to use our military and use our military as a strength. We're going to say, oh, these other nations are infringing upon us, and that's why we have conflict with them. It is not our fault. It is their fault for the way that they are behaving towards us, and that's why we must strike. And then the idea of we as a people are better than these other people are. And again, that's where we cross over from patriotism into nationalism, where we have that shift in mindset from we have pride in who we are and what we do over to our pride in who we are and what we do matters more than somebody else's, than another nation's. And that idea of trying to unify people through that. Blake, I agree with you. I think that we can draw, that might be like a complex understanding piece, is the idea of the Crusades, that it's an acknowledgement that it's not just existing, it's existing at the expense of somebody else. And that pride that you have in showcasing that matter. I also want to pull this out because, again, he is a conservative. And so he does do a lot of conservative things. Sorry, I wanted to pull out this quote for you. Furthermore, one is too sensitive about the government's mistakes. As if it were enough to say this and that cabinet minister made mistakes, as if one wasn't adversely affected oneself. Public opinion changes. The press is not the same as public opinion. One knows how the press is written. Did that not send?
We need to keep
And there are some tools, Courtney, on the talent management page we can point.
Maybe I have to do that in two pieces.
To help with that too. For success factors.
There we go. So this quote here, this is straight out of the conservative playbook. Stop being so critical of the government. The government knows more than you do. And really, it's not even the people who are disagreeing with the government. It's the press who's disagreeing. The press is who is at fault here. They don't actually represent the majority of the people. So why should the government listen to what the press has to say? This is straight out of the conservatives' playbook, that the idea that you're trying to drive a wedge between people who might disagree with you, so that they're disagreeing with you for different reasons, making it more difficult for them to unite together against you as a true authoritative leader. Otto von Bismarck is not the president. He's essentially what we would look at as like a prime minister at this point. So he's not the head person in charge, but he is the one driving the policies of Prussia and then Germany from there. Yeah, he absolutely silences the press. He actually goes in. Let me see if I have this document queued up real quick. He actually goes in and basically says that the German government has the ability to shut down any press as it sees fit in order to, as he's like kind of declaring it almost like a national emergency. And so he will do a lot to go against some of those things. He takes it out of Metternich. And let's see if I can pull this quote out from Metternich that he kind of uses to guide this. So this is Metternich, again, kind of the originator of conservative thought here. Let's see if this works.
For all of us, it'll be editable. And that's Erica and Wong and I were talking about this morning, as well as
paste this in here.
If we need to, we can go through and adjust as we realize things don't make sense.
No, it's not. Okay, but the quote, I'll read it directly here so that you can see it. Again, this is from Metternich, and this is what OVB is looking at as a model. The greatest and consequently the most urgent evil now is the press. Measures referring to it, which I intend to bring forward at the Carlsbad Congress, I will tell you all the more gladly as I wish you to give me your opinion on my ideas without reserve and put myself in a position to help me effectually. How about that first line, though? The greatest and consequently most urgent evil now is the press. This is what authoritative leaders who don't want to be questioned will do. They will say the people questioning them are actually the problem. Germany is weak, in this case Austria. Austria is weak not because of mistakes made by the government, but because of these other people who are calling out these perceived mistakes that don't actually exist. And so OVB is going to pull a lot of that forward. I don't know if I agree with that, Tyler. I would say that you're still going to have a lot of people doing the same thing. Here's the other piece of it. It's really difficult to just say the press when we talk about anybody who puts news out there, because there's so much more access to it. And so each organization is going to have its own slant, its own take on things. And so as opposed to reporting things that happen, I think that there's much more commentary on news and press than ever before. And so I think that's a piece of it too. Thomas, yeah, he's basically doing that, but he's trying to do it in a way that it doesn't seem like he's trying to silence the people, but instead he wants to give the people a voice. He values the voice of the people. It's just that if you disagree, it's because you're wrong, is his kind of mantra behind this. Yeah, I think he does. He wants to make it seem as if there's only one voice coming out of the government, and anybody questioning that voice is, again, this is where nationality comes in, is anti-German. the people who are calling out these perceived mistakes, according to OVB, is those are the people who are anti-German. They want to make Germany weak for some reason, and that's why they're questioning things. What does iron and blood mean at the end of the speech? Yeah, we need this quote, so let's talk about this. And again, please do read and look at all of these sources. Don't get stuck just on yours, even as you respond. Let's see if this works. Too big. All right, Prussia's borders, according to the Vienna Treaties of 1814 and 15. This was the start of that conservative movement. That's at the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 15. They had just gotten rid of Napoleon. They want to make sure that nothing like that could ever happen again. So they're going to draw the actual borders that get very, very close to the borders of Europe as we would look at them today, and say, all right, we need to ensure that these borders stay as they are so that we don't have this giant empire trying to take things over once again. He says Prussia's borders are not favorable for a healthy and vital state. And this goes to his argument that Germany has a right to go to war against these other nations in order to, and he'll use different things, as I mentioned in the lecture, protect German-speaking peoples, etc. But they're not favorable for a healthy and vital state. So therefore, it is necessary for Prussia, and then again for Germany later, to expand its borders in order to provide for a healthy and viable state. We're not doing it to take over the world. We're doing it to make sure the viability of Germany as a nation. It is not by speeches and majority resolutions. It is not by a constitution. It's not by people questioning and discussing and talking about these things, these liberal ideas that came out in 1849 and 48 and 49. But yet essentially these great questions of the time will be decided by iron and blood, the sword and the dedication of the people to their nation. Military and nationalism is basically what he's using iron and blood for here. I feel like Iron and Blood would be just a great band name if you're like a hardcore rock band. So basically, again, the end of this, he's advocating for nationalism with blood, okay, the willingness of the people to spill blood for their nation, to protect their nation and its people, and by iron, its ability to fight. That's why he says we need to have a standing army. We need to be ready for threats from these different nations that are trying to take away the viability of Germany to exist at, well, it's not Germany yet, but Prussia to exist as is. And that's his justification for it. All right, so those are the big things I wanted to hit with Otto von Bismarck. So now let's talk questions that you have on OVB, where we're headed with the next part of this unit, if you've looked ahead at the next couple of lessons here. Any questions on assignments or anything coming up here? I wouldn't say it's a common theme in Germany. I would, however, say that the nationalist ideas are going to be used by the fascist dictators, by Benito Mussolini in Italy, by Adolf Hitler in Germany. I think that those fascist leaders will see how nationalist movements can enhance the power, the authoritative power as a leader, and then they use that as we springboard into the interwar period and then into World War II. Yes, the capital of North Dakota, not North Korea, is named after Otto von Bismarck. Is that a coincidence? No, I can't remember what the tie-in is. I knew it at one point in time, but I'm sure if you just Google like North Dakota, Otto von Bismarck, something will pop up there. If not, I'll take a look. later, and I'll give you some sort of answer to that.
Hey, and Courtney, I will reply all to this and send around so everyone has a link to like a step-by-step comprehensive guide to success.
On the map, it shows that there's a boundary of the German Confederation. Yeah, sure. So if you have the ability to pull up the map right now, take a peek. German Confederation boundary, that is based on the lines of the Congress of Vienna. So that is pre-Germany. That's those 38 different principalities and duchies at this point in time that make up the German Confederation. That German Confederation is essentially going to be the Zollverein. Notice that it does expand down into Austria, but yet when Germany becomes Germany, you can see that that line is redrawn because Austria is not a part of Germany. That happens as a result of the Austro-Prussian War prior to the Franco-Prussian War in the 1860s. So the reason why that line is there is that's like this loose connection of states. Think about what the Articles of Confederation did. When you learned about that in prior years, it's a weak collection of these different states. It didn't have a fully formed federal government. That's like this. Yes, they have some trade restrictions, and they got rid of those trade restrictions in an effort to try and create economic unity, but they're not super tied together until 1871, and the Empire of Germany is proclaimed by Otto von Bismarck in Paris. Geneva, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down if that helps. Yeah, Sage, I would say absolutely Iron and Blood speech shows militarism. It's advocating for the military as a necessary piece of Germany's existence and advocating for the pride in Germany's military as well. That's something that comes out in this speech for sure, that he's trying to get to. So you see that there's a tie between nationalism and militarism. Militarism isn't just about building a military, it's also about tying that into your identity as a nation. I think that this is a good question. I would say Otto von Bismarck wouldn't care if he's loved or feared. He would work towards loved in order to keep him in power. But ultimately, he says the common people shouldn't be questioning the government because the government is constantly being questioned by the people within the government. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be a loved or feared thing. He wouldn't care, I would say. He's going to do things to try and make sure that people respect the government. I mentioned in the lecture video how he pulls in some of these liberal concepts, some of these socialist concepts in order to keep everybody happy. But it's not out of a willingness to be loved. It's rather a willingness to say, this is how our nation moves forward. Nationalism speech questions at the bottom say paragraph 1. No, so this is for the next activity. You're going to be looking at a speech by a Frenchman named Ernest Renan. And in Renan, where it says paragraph 1, et cetera, that's just referring to those individual paragraphs where those concepts take place. And if you look at the Google Doc, I think I specified that a little bit better. Maybe not, but that's where those individual concepts and questions are referring to. You are not writing a full paragraph for each one of those. And I haven't submitted like a Google form in the same way that I did it for this one. So when we eventually start submitting those, the next activity with Ernest Renan's nationalism speech, I do want to see what that looks like on your end and my end. You shouldn't have to save it as, I think it automatically will save it as a document in your drive, and then you will submit that forward. But I want to talk to you after you submit those to see what that looks like, because I haven't done it in this way before. So I'll stick around for another couple of minutes here if you have any questions, but a couple of things to take note of if you're just checking in now. Hopefully, if you left, if someone left already, reassessments for the French Revolution DBQ are due by the end of the night tonight. Get those to me. Grades are due on my end on Friday. So if you check at some point, probably midday tomorrow, all of the grades for the third 9 weeks will be up to date at that point. So essentially the 2 assignments that I gave to you this week, those will be your first 2 grades on the fourth 9 weeks. but essentially grades are done minus if you're reassessing the French Rev DBQ. And again, if you have questions about that, I'll be checking my email pretty consistently, or shoot me a message on Remind. I'll see that notification pretty quickly too, and we can talk about it together. 60 Seconds with Slim is going to start up today. I'm going to record my first one later on today, so make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, and then you'll be able to be notified when those pop up. I'm going to post one of those a day. Make sure that you are adding to that Google Doc in terms of what you'd like me to rant on for about 60 seconds. Again, they do have to be appropriate for school, and we want to try and avoid current politically divisive issues and ideas. So fire those in there, and then I'll be starting that up today. Any last questions or thoughts? Stan Luna? Yeah, I got it. We're good.
I tried to do that, which is why I kept both my own and yours there so you could see the difference. And if you don't agree with me, let me know.
All right. If nothing else, I hope that you have a great rest of your day. I hope that things are starting to click into place for this new learning environment for you. If you have questions, or if you think that there's a way that I can help you with that, or if you're just struggling with it, talk to me, and I'd be more than happy to give you some thoughts and some ideas. And then I will see you hopefully on Friday as we check back in as like our second half of the week review. Have a great rest of your day. Please be safe, you and your family, and I will see you then.